Woo-wee! I have drank an uncomfortable amount of cold brew this week. Trying out this new setup. Last time the audio was a little weak, and so made some improvements. We're trying to upgrade the audio and visual quality of the Folly Coffee podcast. Today's live interview episode will be with barista Brandon Martin, my business partner over at Philtera Cold Brewed Coffees. I see he just joined. I see he has sent a request to be in the video. Cross our fingers. This works. Waiting for barista Brandon. My audio went out.
Oh, hey guys.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I can't hear myself through the microphone. Does it sound like a really high quality audio like I'm using the microphone, or do you think it's the phone again?
Could be the phone, I would think.
Yeah. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'll keep this here for visual effect. All right. So I was just kind of introducing you. And so we've got barista Brandon Martin, my business partner over at Philtera Cold Brewed Coffees. For those of you that don't know, Folly Coffee Roasters is we started in January of 2018. In April of 2018, Brandon approaches me about cold brew. I say, I'm not really interested. I'm super busy with Folly. I tasted what he was making. And then he goes, I only want to go on tap. And then also, I want to work with a variety of coffee roasters so that we have a full portfolio of cold brews, because the cold brews on the market right now are just kind of like not exciting. They're not intricate. They're not complex. It's kind of like that standard, like dark roasted, cheap coffee, kind of sweet, kind of simple. A lot of the ready to drink versions, especially canned or bottled, use sugar. And you're like, why isn't it exciting? And so I've told kind of my side of the story of Philtera, but your side of it was much more leading up to it than when I first met you. And so my story of Philtera Cold Brewed Coffees begins when you approached me about it. But your side of it, I imagine, started much, much earlier. So that's kind of where I wanted to start today, was get your side of it, because I don't even know if we've officially talked about at what point you started thinking about it or what inspired you to do it, and kind of the trajectory of where you started and leading up to it. So I guess kind of give your background of how you got started in coffee, when did it switch over to cold brew, and then at what point did it turn into this might be something I want to do?
Yeah. So coffee for me started at Starbucks. I was working at the Hyatt through college, which had like a Starbucks inside of it. I fell in love with like just serving coffee, being behind the bar, talking to people, all that stuff. And then the dream was to own my own coffee shop one day. Like, I'm going to go through college, get that day job, and then when I retire, I'll own a coffee shop. I graduated during the recession. Couldn't pull myself to get like a desk job. It's just not my style. So stayed at the Hyatt, kind of worked my way through there doing different management stuff. And then just decided, like, man, if you're going to do it, like if this is the dream, just pull the trigger and hop in like true millennial fashion. So went on Craigslist and found a job managing a specialty coffee shop at Blue Ox, which is now Black Eye, which is now closed, on 38th in Chicago. Awesome spot. Fell in love with specialty coffee then, and just kind of went down this rabbit hole and like whatever. So at that point, I've been making home coffee quite a bit. My first ever was like AeroPress, which is awesome. If people on here don't have an AeroPress, check it out. That's a great way to you can do so many different things with it. But anyways.
So what year is this all? I know you said recession, so I imagine 2008, 2009.
Yeah, this is, I think I dove in at like 2010 is when I started at Blue Ox. Okay. But I've been working at the Hyatt beforehand for a few years.
In Minneapolis?
Yeah, yep. And then started getting into cold brew a little bit at home, which is like a little home toddy. And for like a summer, I actually started selling it to friends. I don't know if I ever told you that, in like mason jars.
Wow. When did you
just
start
was
doing
like,
that?
oh God, that was it was a while ago, man. It was like 8 years. I don't know. It was yeah, I'm
I
old.
did not know that.
And yeah, it was just like people love cold brew. It's easy to make. You don't need a lot of equipment. Like a latte, you don't need an espresso machine or anything. So fast forward, worked my way through. I started working at Bootstrap, doing sales for them. Worked at Quixotic. Just kind of hopping around. And then as I was in the industry, I kind of noticed that like all these bars and restaurants and stuff want cold brew, but they don't want to do it themselves. It's kind of a distraction for them. And then a lot of the roasters in town didn't offer commercial cold brew.
So when you're brewing these mason jars of cold brew, is your focus like I want to create the best tasting cold brew, or were you just like, oh man, you can make this at home? I bet I could sell some of this.
I was intrigued by the idea of, because this hot coffee is amazing. Like pour overs are like I'll always love pour overs. And the flavor you get from that, I wasn't able to get in cold brew and initially. And I was like, man, there's just got to be a way that you can get some of that sweetness from like Ethiopia or something like that and have it come through in a cold brew. And it's still to this day is like my goal is like, what can you do with cold brew in a similar fashion with like pour overs and stuff? Like what variables can you manipulate, blah, 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 to extract all these flavors? So that was kind of like the catalyst. Initially, it was just like, man, I just want some cold brew in the morning. But with anything in coffee, it's a rabbit hole, and I just keep going. So then you mess with all these variables. I have somewhere in my house, there's a log of like everything, roast date, grind size, weighing the water down to the gram, all that stuff. Everything you would do for like hot coffee.
When you start doing this on the cold. Yeah, when you start doing this and you're logging things and you're writing down grind size and coffee type and roast date and batch size and all these different variables you're manipulating with cold brew, is this with the intention that, man, I want to start something in cold brew someday, or were you just intrigued that's like, how good a cold brew can I make?
It was never a business idea. Well, I don't know. I never really thought about it too much. I knew I wanted to own my own business, but I had no idea what it would be. And actually, one of the strong catalysts of making like just branding, you got to have your own business, is health insurance. I was in the coffee industry, and it's so hard to get health insurance. And I called Minnesota Sure, and they're like, it's really easy to get health insurance if you're your own employer, like if you own your own company. I was like, maybe that's how I do this. So that was like what put the fire underneath me initially. And then, chatting with you and then just fleshing out the idea for what like Philtera is and how we developed it. It was just there's no going back. Like once I knew that there was a market for something like this and that we could do it, it was no question.
So that's a side that's always kind of confounded me, is because so I launched Folly in January of 2018. Up to that point, I had moved back in May, and we just met at random events. And, we knew each other all right by that point. We chatted at different events, and Folly was 4 months in, and we had a handful of stores. I'm really curious on your end. How did you approach this business? Did you know you wanted to start it with a partner, or was it potentially a solo venture? Or how did you view it of what was the path to starting? And then how did you ultimately lead to the decision to even approach me with the idea?
That's a good question. So initially I had no idea. It was just like, something's got to give, you got to do it. So my backup plan was, dude, I'll just slang cold brew at the farmer's market, like out of my truck. Yeah. But then, the more it developed and the more I was talking with you, you gotta realize what you're good at and what you're not. And I've always loved working with my hands. Like I just want to make coffee. I love serving it. I love creating it. Like when I was at Bootstrap, one of the coolest things was like you're at the farmer's market and you're brewing hot coffee and you see like dozens of people walking around with something that you made is just like a really cool feeling. So I always knew that I wanted to make it. And I also realized that I'm not good at, people things, in front of the house. I always wanted to be like the cook and then have someone else do like everything else type thing. So the more you and I interacted, it was pretty clear that, our talents complement each other pretty well.
Yeah, because I was like, I want to drink the coffee. I was like, I love learning about it, but in terms of the actual the process, there's a certain level where I'm just like my attention span can't hold up.
Yeah. It just makes sense. Like it's just a big believer that life just throws opportunities at you, and you just got to be aware of them. And the fact that you worked for Sam Adams and you knew how to slang kegs, you know how to talk about it. You're a business owner. You've done this before. How do you go get a business license? How do you go, all that stuff.
The speed at which we launched was pretty crazy because you introduced the idea to me in April, which I was hesitant at first, but then after tasting what you were doing, it was like, whew, there's something here. And then looking at that, as I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast on the audio side, was like, man, there's not a lot of people focusing on this. And then remembering back to my trips to Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and these West Coast trips, being like, man, everybody has cold brew on tap. Like this has got to be a thing here. And so April's when you approached me. We ended up launching in September. And the whole story of Philtera is on another episode. If you head to the Folly Coffee podcast, head to that. I talk about the whole process of starting, launching, and where we're at and all that. So I don't want to get too deep into that because that could be the entire interview today. But I'm more curious about the technical side of cold brew because it's interesting being the customer facing side of this business because it's with Folly, it's like I will put our coffees against anyone. Put our coffees on any table. I know we're going to stand up. And I know the quality we're roasting is going to be among the best in the country. The cold brew side, I go, no, this is the best. This is the best cold brew I've tasted. And I say that definitively, and I know that makes you uncomfortable because you're like, oh, I'm humble and I don't want to brag. But I'm like, I can walk into any meeting or any tasting and anyone where I'm giving somebody a sample and being like, this cold brew is not like anyone is doing. And so getting more into the technical side, at what point in your home brewing process, while you're just exploring the flavor possibilities of cold brew, what was the turning point where your cold brew went from just no different than what you get at the cafe to where you started to realize that what you were doing was much better tasting than what you could get out there?
Oh man, I don't know if there was ever a specific point. I think it was a gradual. Honestly, I was so into hot coffee, professionally. Learning everything you can about espresso and then pour overs. Going out to Seattle for my barista level 1 class. It's honestly just taking those principles and translating it over to cold coffee. Traditionally, cold coffee in shops I've worked out in the past, it's old beans that didn't sell at retail, and you're just throwing it in there. You grind it. You're not weighing anything really. You're just we have a 5-pound bag. Let's just throw that in there and hope for the best. And then the staff the next day would pull it at whenever time was convenient. So it could be 10 a.m. It could be in the afternoon, and it's just I always thought it was crazy how you go in and you open the shop and you're spending half an hour at least dialing in your espresso shot. You're controlling the temperature and all this stuff. And then cold brew is always just an afterthought. So really it's just, so my dad's a mechanical engineer and I think I get it from him. It's using math and science to get something that tastes good, which is kind of crazy because taste is so subjective. But in reality, you're looking at extraction with math and science. And so I think my philosophy has been just record every variable that you possibly can, even if you don't think it's going to be useful. and then just kind of tweak one thing at a time and see what works and what doesn't. And, I mean, I think we're at a really good spot with Philtera, but I think there's so much more potential of like what, is you can never be 100% satisfied. Like I'll never just be like, oh, we're good. Like I'm just gonna coast and like, you can always make it better.
Absolutely.
Which is, I love the challenge.
So let's run through the process of how you would start from scratch on a brand new coffee, which we actually did recently with Spy House and onboarding them as a new partner. Run me through the process of you get a bean you've never brewed before. How do you decide where to start? And then how do you then dial in the recipe to exactly where you want to be?
Yeah. So a lot of that is the coffee information that you get just right off the bat, like what roast level is it and what origin is it. And just from my experience in the hot coffee world, you kind of know what to expect with those two. Like if it's a darker roast, you're looking for something big body, chocolatey, for lack of a better word, it just tastes like a solid coffee.
Yeah.
If it's a medium roast that's a little bit more fruity, maybe it's from like Africa or Central America or something, then you should be able to get some fruitier, smooth notes, some light, crisp type thing. And then what I'll do is I'll do two things. I'll honestly brew it hot. I'll try to bring it home and do a pour over of it just to get that immediate, like, these are some flavor notes that you can get with a different brew method. And then go and brew 3 different batches of cold brew, kind of using like my base knowledge. I'll do like one that I know should be like decent based off previous ones that we've done. One that's kind of like a hopeful one, like a little bit more experience, and then I'll do like a crazy one, like and then you kind of got to wait, and then you just keep doing that. You go and taste it the next day, what worked, what didn't work. You can go look at all your variables and see what's different. And then with Spy House, it was actually really cool to get other people involved with that.
Yeah.
With that process. So I think we went back and forth with them like 4 times.
Yeah.
Something like that, which I geeked out on. That was so cool. So we sent it off to them. They were like, oh, we did a blind tasting. So we labeled each bag A, B, or C. They had no idea what was different about them, but I did. And they're like, ooh, we really like C, but part of B, we really like the body of B. Like, can you take those 2 things and come back to us? And then, yeah. I mean, so like if you wanted more body, like what do you do with hot coffee if you want something with more body? Increase the extraction, which could be grind size, time. It's all like there's all this different stuff. Agitation.
This is the type of information that 99% of people are half asleep right now, but there's 1% that's like, keep going deeper.
Yeah.
So we had a couple questions come in from the Instagram story of what to ask you. The first one I think is just like very, very easy answer, I think, is do you taste every batch going out? And when you're tasting it, what are you looking for as you taste it?
Yeah, I mean, 100% taste every batch. Jeff, who helps us brew on the weekends, is there with us. Has got an incredible palate. But yeah, every batch. I mean, so working at the Hyatt, I got some experience working in kitchens, and they always have a spoon on them. They're always tasting. And I try to do that too. So literally every batch I'll taste at least once when it's done. Sometimes I'll take a little bit at different times during the brew just to see what's going on. What was the other question?
What are you looking for? So
Okay.
let's talk about tasting 2 different situations here. So Spy House situation where we just onboarded them and it's a brand new coffee. What are you looking for when you taste it? When it's a brand new coffee, and then what are you looking for on a coffee you've brewed 100 times already?
Yeah, so for Philtera, I think if we have a coffee that's on the menu, I'm looking for consistency. So is this tasting as it tasted last week? And if not, why? What changed? Is the roast date?
when you say it tastes like it does last week, do you have any way of tracking that information, or is it just from memory?
Oh no, it's spreadsheets galore, baby. I can literally go back at every single brew that we've ever done, and there's comments on it with every single variable. It's a giant spreadsheet. So that, yeah, so we're tasting for consistency. Is it up to par?
Yeah.
You know, if it's better, which it happens, what changed that made it better? You know, occasionally it's a little worse, and like, all right, how can we avoid that going forward? You never want any change to be drastic, like week to week. You know, when you go to McDonald's and you get a burger, it's going to taste the same every single time. I think as a business, consistency is huge. Yeah, and then I try to use the cupping, you know, the cupping sheet they use for hot coffee. So you have like 10 different like categories. You rate each one on 0 to 10 and kind of translate that over to coffee. So you're looking for sweetness, bitterness, body, acidity, you know, all that stuff. Yeah.
And then another question we got in is during this time, during COVID-19, and things are crazier than ever, how do you approach brewing during this time in terms of like safety? Like what is there anything you're doing differently, or is it something that protocol is already in place for this type of thing?
Yeah, so I've always been probably like overly concerned about food safety just because I'm OCD like that. So I think we've had a lot of procedures in place already. Like thankfully I had like 100 or so masks that I use when we grind coffee. All those particles get in the air and you don't want to breathe that in. So we had some masks already. You know, we have gloves, all that stuff. So thankfully we had all that stuff in inventory already. And our practices are so that, you know, you don't really have direct contact with the end product at all. You know, it's a pretty contactless brew that we have.
Yeah, I will say if there's one thing I wasn't at all concerned about was like, oh, we need to change our what Brandon's doing, because I've read through your hazard action critical control point plan and just no, yeah. So it is an interesting one because there's a lot of businesses out there that feel compelled that they need to tell you what they're doing differently, and there's a part of me that's like, if you're doing something different, haven't you already kind of been controlling for all this? Like, there's lots of risk factors out there, and you should be controlling for all of them, even when it isn't a crisis. But I'm not going to be the one to say it, but I just said it, so I guess I'm the one to say it.
Yeah, dude, it's a little. Were you coughing on my food before? Like, what's going on?
And so, and then the third question, which was submitted by me, is: have you always been a fan of hip hop? And how did that start? Because that is something I did not know this about you until all of a sudden, every time I went to stop by and you happened to be brewing, hip hop blasted in the background. Then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is like his thing. And then I started asking for suggestions, and you're throwing out these albums I've never heard of or never listened to. I'm like, okay, like I can get down with this.
Dude, I can remember the day I felt it was in 8th grade, and this guy Alex Polkev, I don't know if he's on here, gave me like, you remember back in the day people used to like burn mixtapes and stuff like that.
Yeah, like off the radio.
Yeah, a CD of Atmosphere, who I've never heard of at that point, and it from there Alex Polkev, I owe him my love of hip hop, and then I went to a Wu-Tang concert, I think when I was like way too young, 9th or 10th grade, something like that, at the Myth, I think, which was insane. I didn't even know what I was getting into. But that was those two events in my life I look at for the Wu-Tang and Alex Polkev in 8th grade.
Some good, young people content, I think. They cover some
Yeah.
family-friendly topics in their in their songs.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious on your end because obviously, I've an interesting situation on my side. I've got Folly and Philtera, but Philtera being your first business venture, going into it, what did you expect? How's it been different? Has it been good? Has it been bad? Or like, what are kind of the big things about starting your own business that have been not what you expected?
It's a good question. I think probably one of the earliest lessons I learned was how easy it is to like literally start a business. I always thought it was like, I don't know why, but like a month-long process of all these forms and everything. And like, I think you went online and filled out like the Minnesota stuff, and then like 15 minutes later, we're like official. Just like $200 later.
Yeah, once we had the name decided, you're like, okay, what do we do now? Like, who do we contact? I was like, what do you mean? Like, to file the business? I was like, oh, just, yeah, let me know. I'll file it.
It was nuts. I was like, man, why doesn't everyone have a business?
Yeah.
And then, once you start getting into it, it's a little different, but I love it every day. I mean, you're not working for anyone else but yourself, and I love the unique problems that come up. Like the coronavirus was a great example. Like our wholesale business pretty much tanked overnight. So you have the decision to either like, what are you going to do? Just lay there and go out of business, or do you adapt and like change your business? And so now we're doing home deliveries, which has been fantastic. And people really dig it, and it could be a long-term play. We'll see, but stuff like that where, it's every day is a little bit different. There's a new challenge, and it's your own challenge. Like you don't have to go ask a boss for approval to, do this, and this. You just do it. What about you? You have a third business coming along anytime soon?
No, I feel I've been very outward about this. That it's all kind of made up. Like, it's kind of what you said. You view it from the outside in, and you go, man, starting a business is a whole official thing, and everybody that does it knows exactly what they're doing, and like everybody's got a plan. And it's kind of, you realize more and more that the stuff that ends up working and doesn't working is never what you expect. And so, I mean, Philtera is the ultimate example. I was not even a huge cold brew fan, as most coffee nerds aren't. Most extreme coffee nerds actually kind of scoff at cold brew. It's a very simple flavor profile. It generally, when you brew it in the traditional manner, it's like simple, it's sweet, it's all right. You can crush it for some caffeine, and that's kind of like the perception of cold brew. And then all of a sudden you come along, and I'm like, oh yeah, Brandon, like I know he's been in coffee for a long time. You approached me about cold brew, and I'm like, I don't know. But then you taste it, and we kind of just stumbled into this thing. And the Philtera side of things is really interesting because, again, you think businesses are these things that you have this grand master plan, but all we had was what I think is just a really great product and an interesting lane. At the time, I didn't know if it was a good lane, but I was like, at the very least, this lane we're pursuing is interesting. What I mean by that is on tap only. Mm-hmm. Is I'm like, and as I've told you, Blue Ocean Strategy, look up that book. It's like what Philtera was built on from like a marketing, branding, and like business strategy perspective. But I get super intrigued by anything that's different. If I haven't heard of it before, I'm interested. And so I tasted your cold brew, and right away I was like, this is different than anything I've tasted. And so right away I'm like, that's super intriguing. And then being on tap only, I'm like, not only is that different than any company, I don't know of any cold brew company that's only on tap. I go, that's intriguing. And then your final idea of, I don't want to just be a cold brew. I want to be a like partner to some of the area's best roasters. And then all of a sudden I'm like, there's the final piece. And so I think it was like a very interesting lane. I think it was a great idea. And ultimately the product, the cold brew, was incredible. And like you said, it's not like I had this grandmaster plan laid out. I go, I've sold to bars, restaurants, cafes before. Like, let's do it. And it was much different than starting Folly, because Folly was like a scratch build out in terms of we had to literally build an entire roasting facility. We had to get approvals from Department of Agriculture from scratch. It was an entirely new facility. Whereas for this one, we started in that community kitchen. And I think the thing that astounded me about this was the speed at which it happened. And then the biggest difference between Folly and Philtera is that with Folly, obviously I started it like on my, I was the sole owner of the business. And so ultimate decision making was left up to me. And then in partnering with you, I was honestly a bit hesitant because I've read all the horror stories in business of a partnership in business. And I was like, I know my personality type, that I'm very decisive about the things that I think work and don't, and that could be a big problem. But what you said earlier, and I've alluded to this many times, is like specialization in business in a partnership is so key. And the things that you're passionate about, ultimately we're both passionate about the best tasting cold brew we can make. And then after that, you're passionate about the production side and how can we continue to not only make the best cold brew, but even get better. And then on my side, it's like, where can I take it to more people? And customer facing is me, back of house is you. And there are times I might want to say something and I don't. And I'm sure there are times that you go, maybe I have a different opinion, but you don't, because we've created these tight lanes. And then I think the last piece is you're a super, super hard worker. And like that is such a critical component to point out, because I think sometimes, especially in this time with small business, for small businesses that are doing, well, or continuing to grow, at least, it might seem easy. But your willingness to just do work. And then I pride myself on being a hard worker.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, when you combine people like that, things just get done. And that's what I think, that's what I didn't expect. Because quite honestly, I did not know you that well when we launched. And so like, I knew about like your reputation, and I asked around, and more people said that'd be a great person to partner with. But like the biggest thing is like, just, there's never a situation where I'm like, we're not going to figure this out, because of just, we're both willing to work hard. And it's like, man, if you have a great product, if you have a good idea and you're willing to work hard, like, yeah, you might not be Amazon, but you're going to have a really nice business.
Yeah, dude. I think even without a great product, as long as you're working hard, it's at the end of the day, you'll find something that it'll give. It's hard work pays off 100%.
And so that's kind of the thing that I didn't expect with Philtera was, we found, my biggest worry in starting it is, this is super specific niche to pursue. Cold brew on tap. And
our timing was really great too.
Yeah, the timing is good. I think more and more people are looking for something unique. But man, I was like, this is a super specific lane, but ultimately the startup costs, like we both split 50, or whatever it was, like half and half about the funds, and it was your savings and it was the Folly tax return I got. And that's what we started it on. And so at the end of the day, I was like, man, if this doesn't work, it's like, yeah, that was a lot, but at the time, especially, it was like, it wasn't a massive risk, which sounds kind of bad to say now, but you got to take in all these different factors. But that was kind of, I was really excited to get back to the bar side and start talking to restaurants, because that was a lane at Sam Adams that I was like super, super comfortable with. And I think that's kind of back to your point, is like, play on your strengths. And then what aren't you good at? I never would have started Philtera if I was the brewer. Or if I could not have started Philtera if it was a one-person operation. Like, I just couldn't have. It's not, I'm not saying I can't make a great cold brew. I am confident that I could make a cold brew at home tomorrow that would be better than most. But in order to separate yourself as a business, you can't just be better than most. It has to be a whole different level of difference to even get your foot in the door, because you're no brand equity, like no name, and you're just knocking on doors. And those are kind of my big takeaways of this, is that what you're making is incredible. And by the way, the fact that I don't make it allows me to say that in a meeting and not come across as like super arrogant. And then very specific lane that we chose. And then the fact that we work with a group of roasters, we have these amazing coffees to work with. And so that's a whole nother layer that we don't have to focus on, is like, is the base coffee going to be a great product, or is it going to be great tasting, or do we
That's a good point.
do we have to worry about the consistency of the roasted coffee? And this is something I kind of thought of recently, is that if we were just a cold brew brand and we weren't roasting the coffee and we were just sourcing it from whoever, they don't really care what the coffee would taste like because it's our brand at stake. But by having roaster partners, this is their coffee. And so obviously they're extremely focused on that their coffees are going to be very high quality. And so in a weird way, it elevates the entire program because they're focused on roasting the best coffees and we're only focused on brewing the best coffees. Cool.
Yeah, man. I roasted one batch of coffee back in the day at Bootstrap, and that was enough for me to know it's a whole other rabbit hole that I don't want to go down.
Yeah.
And, you know, selfishly working with all these roasters is a blast for me, just because you get to taste all these great coffees. You know, it's, Blue Ox was a multi-roaster cafe back in the day. And that was always like the best part of the job was, ooh, what roaster should we reach out to this month? And, you know, see. So it's just, yeah, I mean, there's so much good coffee out there. It's one of the favorite things of mine is to work with the roasters themselves.
Yeah, and I think the other side too of like both you and I are similar that, you know, maybe I'm interested in starting a business someday, but like ultimately it was the thing that you found before that turned into a business that you're like, this is just something I'm doing because I want to see if I can make this at home better than I've had. And my path in coffee started with, I just want to find the best tasting coffees. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait, this could be a thing. And so that's been the really cool thing about Philtera is like, and what I'm really excited about is we just met an hour before this started to do our planning of the future. And it's like, yeah, stuff is crazy right now. Our wholesale business is literally like, I don't know, 10% of what it was. So we've lost about 95% of our business. And yet most of what we're talking about is our exciting projects that we're going to be able to get going once things normalize a bit. And the home delivery has all of a sudden taken off. And it's like, if we didn't have great cold brew, who would want to go out of their way to get a home delivery or even be willing to pay that?
Yeah, it's been very rewarding, to say the least.
Yeah. And so those are kind of like all the questions I had for you, but I'm sure anybody listening has made cold brew at home at this point in the whole thing, because if you've listened to this much talk about cold brew, you're probably pretty into it. What would be your top tips for somebody who makes cold brew at home to just immediately elevate their game?
Oh, great question. Start with whole bean, just like you would for a regular hot coffee. Grind it fresh if you can. Start with the coarsest setting. And get a coffee that you enjoy hot. You know, if it's not good hot, it's not going to be good cold. What else? Filtration is actually really fun to play around with. So if you're doing a home toddy or in a mason jar or something like that, you know, get a cheesecloth at the very least. It's pretty porous, but Toddy makes these little filter bags made out of paper, like a giant tea bag or something. And honestly, that was probably one of the biggest innovations on the Philtera side was our filtration technology. And it's so easy to do at home. It makes such a big difference. It's like a clean cup of cold brew versus, you know, something that's kind of muddy and chalks up your mouth.
Do you think if you filter more coarsely, do the particles of coffee grounds that get left behind, do you think over time they add to bitterness? Because in theory, if you've got some
it's still extracting
left behind, it's kind of still brewing at a small level.
For sure. Yep. Yeah. One of my prides is like, you know, you finish a pouch or a glass, whatever, of our cold brew, and there's no sediment at the bottom. It's like a small like pleasure of mine. It's like, oh, sweet. And if you go and get something else, I'm trying to think of like I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but if you're left at the bottom, there's all that sediment, and it's just gross. I don't know. It chalks up your mouth.
Well, the last sip is chalky, and
right.
the
You
last
don't want to
sip
end on
is
a bad
what
note.
lingers with you. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think.
Then my only
home-brewed
other tip would be get funky. Play around with really cold water, or you could start with like a hot extraction, and then maybe put some ice in there. Or don't be afraid to get funky. I know you and I tried to do a hopped cold brew early on, and gave up on it just because it wasn't tasting better than just the straight cold brew itself. But that was still like a fun thing to experiment with. I've heard people like putting blueberries and stuff.
Yeah. Here's
have fun
another
with
one
it.
I hear a lot. Brewing in a refrigerated setting. So brewing the coffee, the cold brew in your fridge versus at room temperature.
Yeah. So food safety wise, you're probably going to be okay either way, but we take Philtera, everything's brewed under refrigeration just to really decrease the chance of any bacteria growth or anything. But at home, I'd say you could do either or. Just keep in mind the different temperatures. If you're doing it at room temp, it's going to extract faster than it would in the fridge. So, if you're putting it in the fridge, maybe do it a few hours longer.
What kind of taste differences would you expect? Let's say you did the same time. Well, I'm trying to think. So there's so many variables to play around with. So let's say you did the same amount of time, like 16 hours. One was out of the fridge, one was in the fridge. What flavor differences might you expect?
So the one out of the fridge is going to have significant more extraction. So you're going to get the flavor is going to be a lot more pronounced, and not always in a good way. You're going to get a ton more body, just a lot more kind of in your face. And depending on what coffee it is, maybe the one that you brewed at 16 hours at room temp actually tastes pretty good, and the one in the fridge is under extracted. That's totally fine. If you wanted to kind of do the one in the fridge, you just do it for a little bit longer, and you'll get more or less the same end result. So say you added like 4 hours to the one in the fridge, you compared them side by side. They're going to be pretty similar. You're just kind of adjusting one variable to get to the same place.
Would you compare it all to bourbon? So I did Sazerac. They make Buffalo Trace. They make Pappy Van Winkle, all the really famous bourbons. And they said the way bourbon is made is it's aged in a wood barrel, and then the temperature, the reason Kentucky's really good for it is because it's really warm during the day and it's cool during the night. So the bourbon goes in and out of the wood. At the higher floors of the aging shed, it goes in and out faster because it's higher heat, because it's higher in the building. The ones on the lower is slower because it's a lower temperature. And so if you think about it that way, the best bourbons that they make are somewhere in between, that it's kind of in and out at the perfect pace. The flavor difference between doing a cold brew, stay with me here, the flavor difference between doing a cold brew faster at room temperature versus slower at a refrigerated, even though it's going to be similar in the end, do you think there is a flavor difference between a slower extraction?
I would think so.
If you think of espresso, if you were to extract too quickly versus slower, do you think that's comparable to cold brew, or is this way too much of a stretch?
No, there's probably something there. If you do look at a graph of extraction of cold brew, you get a ton of extraction in the first 12 hours, and then it kind of like levels off a little bit. So there's that to factor in. I don't know. That's a good question. In my experience, I think everything in the fridge usually tastes better. Make sure you put like saran wrap over the top of it so it doesn't, take on the flavor of your leftover meatloaf or whatever.
Which could be delicious.
But you're right. Meatloaf cold brew. Yeah, I don't think it has too much to do with it. Yeah, that's a hard question, man.
It was interesting because I actually met with the Department of Agriculture this week, and they were asking much more intense questions about the roasting process. And she said that 2 years ago, she wouldn't have to ask any of those questions. And I'm like, what changed? And she said cold brew. Prior to cold brew, they didn't consider coffee beans an ingredient because it was brewed hot, that the super hot water was a kill point for any bacteria that might occur. And so ultimately, it is if you're brewing at room temperature, this is what she said. If you're brewing at room temperature, it's safe if that roaster is doing everything correctly, which hopefully every roaster is taking the precautions that it's safe. And I guess the last question I'll have for you, and then I'll let you go here. If somebody is looking for the right type of coffee for their cold brew preferences, generally, what are you looking for what is your preference on a cold brew? And then in terms of like, let's go very basic, light to dark, what are you going to get? And then let's go as specific as origin. So the first, what would be like, if you're going to pick one variety of coffee to cold brew, what would you pick?
Personally, I think I would go with a natural processed blah, blah, blah. Natural process, Ethiopia, Costa Rican, something like that. There's something about that natural process that just adds a ton of sweetness. It's almost like a fruit bomb type thing.
Yeah.
And I really like it. Adds a ton of complexity to it. There's some fermentation that happens for natural process, and I think that comes through in the cold brew.
Yeah.
If you're talking about someone else, the first thing I think about is how you're going to consume it. If you're putting cream and sugar in it, you want that to be a pretty robust cold brew. So
how
you
do
just
you
want
use cream and sugar?
Yeah, we don't have cream and sugar. I'm trying to think of the last time. I try not to judge, but it's teach their own.
Yes.
Oat milk all day if you're going to do cream, though.
But if somebody were to do cream and sugar, you were saying?
Yeah, darker roast is going to be better. And then something that's really like big body chocolatey, like a Brazil, would be great. But honestly, like I would have a cup of hot coffee and without any cream and sugar, and take whatever you like in that format and try to mimic it with cold brew. And it's possible. Like it's definitely possible. And I think you'll see a lot of those flavor notes come through.
And then I guess the last thing for the home portion of it, and this is something that we do at Philtera, but so when you're brewing it at home, typically that'll end up being a concentrate. Actually, so what ratio of coffee to water would you suggest someone uses if they're brewing at home?
It's a good question. I'd say 1 pound to 1 gallon is kind of like the industrial terms, and you could just man, I'd have to look, but I think if you have a home toddy, if I remember right, that comes down to like 10 ounces of whole bean coffee to filling the whole thing up with water. It's about an 8-to-1 ratio at the end of the day.
And is that going to make a concentrate, or do you kind of dilute that at the finish?
It will make a concentrate. I'm a big believer in whatever tastes good, tastes good. So you taste it as you go. I don't think there's a set way to dilute it, but just know that it is highly caffeinated. And but keep diluting it. The more you dilute it, more of that sweetness will come through, which is a kind of a fun thing. And the colder it is. So put your concentrate in the fridge, let it get cold, for 12 hours or whatever, and then dilute it to taste. Yeah, have fun with it.
Cool.
Don't think of it as a commodity.
Yeah. And I always say this about everything, but just like ask a barista. If you're buying your coffee from a roaster, we don't have a cafe, but I've had people email me before, like, hey, if you're buying a coffee, shoot them an email and message them on Instagram. Say, hey, I'm going to make this into cold brew. How should I do it? Like, the source will always have the best information. Yeah. And that's something that I found to be true, like across the board, hot, cold, whatever. However you're going to brew your coffee, if you reach out to that roaster, they're probably more than happy to help you find the best recipe to make that taste the best, because it's their coffee they're passionate about. They're going to want that to taste
Absolutely.
the best for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else?
Don't forget about decaf cold brew.
Decaf cold
There's
brew.
a soft spot in my heart for the decaf folks out there. It can be good.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. No, you're not wrong. But from launching it to market, we are not quite there yet.
Oh no. Although let us know.
Someday when people have 2 or 3 cold brews on tap at every location, then all of a sudden decaf becomes a thing. But anything else?
No. I think that's it.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
well, this was awesome. Let's everybody stay safe out there. Like, this is a very weird time, and obviously on our front it's very weird, but yeah, hopefully when all this is over we can get rocking and roll again and start slinging some great cold brew. Check out the website, get a home delivery. Yep, website right now, www.philtera.coffee. I'll have that. It's in the post. You can find the Philtera Co. is the Instagram. He's at Barista Brandon. Yeah, that's gonna be all I got for you. Unless you got any, unless you want to do any freestyle rapping before we go. Absolutely not. All right. Cool, pay me enough in the world. Thanks for joining, man. Have a good one. See you guys.